Hello, beautiful babes. I am here with Kieran from Wretched of the Earth.
Hello. We're going to talk about whitewashing in environmental activist groups and spaces, and how people of colour can engage with environmental activism. Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about Extinction Rebellion, obviously Wretched of the Earth, and very concrete solutions to how to move forward afterwards, basically.
I hope so.
Yeah. And we're also going to be doing a tutorial on how to do a beautiful winged eyeliner look, actually for hooded eyes. But it's going to be a really cool tutorial. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy it. So we're going to start off with doing eyeshadow on the eyes. Okay. Just here and here. A very light eyeshadow.
Okay.
Just to accentuate certain features, so the creases of your eyes. I'm going to start off doing what I call a transition shade at the top of your eyelids. And then I'm going to move on to a darker orange and a brown in the crease, and then a light shade at the center of your eyelids.
Okay. Wretched of the Earth is a collective of black and brown and indigenous people, and communities as well, and organizations that came together in 2016. Started as a block on a climate justice demo protest. There was a big, really white middle class NGO. We started because we feel and we know that the narrative around climate justice is extremely whitewashed, it's extremely apolitical, and it doesn't really include essentially the actual story of how we got to where we are right now. I feel right now people are thinking a lot more about climate justice and Westerners and the West and Western media and British media and stuff, and British activists and things are thinking a lot more about climate justice in the last year or so, actually, and in the last 5 years it started to become more of a conversation. But basically what we said in the open letter that we wrote to Extinction Rebellion was I think it was Greta Thunberg says, our house is on fire, but our house has been on fire for a very long time, for over 500 years. Capitalism is the reason why all of this shit is happening, and we need to talk about who that affects, and who and that isn't particularly people in the West. It's not particularly this country. The people who are the most affected by the change in sea level, the change in temperature, are black and brown and indigenous communities in the global south. So the narrative around climate justice is extremely whitewashed and apolitical, and doesn't actually include any sense of racial justice or reparations, or an understanding that this entire system, which is built on the backs of the exploitation, which is built on the backs of people in the global south, built on the exploitation and the colonialism and fucking genocide of people, current as well as in the past, of people, the majority of people in the world, of people in the global south. So that's the people, the indigenous peoples of North America, South America, Asia, Middle East, Africa, South Pacific, Aotearoa, which is which I'm not pronouncing right, which is what people call New Zealand and Australia, as well, and all the indigenous peoples of all of those parts of the world, which is what I just named is the world.
Yeah, but that's why the collective is so big, isn't it? I was looking at it, and it's hundreds of people, hundreds of campaigns.
Yeah.
It's a massive project as well.
There was this big climate demo. It was the year that COP21 was happening. And so there was a demo around the same time in London. There was a demonstration. A big very sort of boring climate change demo. Like important, but definitely not really talking about like going to the heart of the issue. And it was like, the idea was like people of color, black and brown people, like it's different terms, indigenous people who are like of indigenous descent or represent indigenous communities, like at this demo and being centered. It's like centering those voices. So we refer to like communities who are on the front line of climate injustice, or in the front line of like creating climate justice, as frontline communities. So for the most part, those are like indigenous communities. But that narrative isn't really being spoken about in like mainstream Western media, or even in not mainstream Western like media. And that narrative is literally just the truth. So it's not like it's a perspective thing. Well, it is a perspective thing, and that's important. But like, it's the perspective of like the people
majority
of the world.
Yeah.
And the history of like how we got to where we are now, which is like exploitation of people and resources on those people's land, and colonialism to get those resources to build and sustain capitalism. Yeah, we had this block on this demo, and it was like pretty cool because there were people who had come from across the world who were like going to COP21 as well. We created this block that represented the voices and the people and the narrative of like of black and brown and indigenous people in the global south. And really the more important thing was that it represents like what we refer to as frontline communities. The people who are really fucking suffering from the effects of not just capitalism, but like the effects of, well, yes, the effects of capitalism, the effects of climate change, the effects of climate injustice. So not just like, so like when people talk about like forest fires, the increase of like forest fires, actually the best way to talk about it is that right now people are talking about like, what was it, like 2 degrees or like 1.5 or whatever is the aim of like, that's the limit. But like, that's the limit really not for most people, because, and also we talk about it like it's this thing that's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, and it's scientific.
It's happening right now though. And like the increase in like cyclones, forest fires, the increase in sea level, the increase in the people's like, there's so many things. There's floods, there's like just the weather patterns that like droughts and things like that are a result of the use of like fossil fuels, let alone like pollution and things like that are just a result of like extraction to get those fossil fuels, but that extraction is happening in communities that are not contributing to any of this. We were actually promised the front of the march. I remember that happening, and then
you were. And then that's what the article said.
That's what the article said, and then oh no.
Close your eyes.
Yeah, I fucked it up. Oh no! Oh no!
You were promised the front of the march.
Yeah, and I think in the end what that meant was, oh no, but not the actual front. That'd be ridiculous, kind of thing, you know, or like not the actual like front where all the pictures are being taken. Yeah. So I remember us like basically taking the front because it's so important that people who either represent or are part of frontline communities are
actually at the front line.
Actually at the front lines, even here. And it represented that, but it also, it was a very powerful moment. And so we went from there. It's a group that tries to push that narrative and like forward, because that's the only way that we're gonna get out of this shit. We mentioned before, like, why would, like, what are the barriers to like people of color organizing in environmental activisty spaces?
Yeah.
I've grown up with parents who activism and like fighting for things that are when you see something that's not right, you stand up, and the idea of like fighting for justice and things like that was never a strange concept in like the house I grew up in. But I never gravitate towards like environmental. What?
No, it looks so good. Wait, can
you? I was like,
it's the first time I did this hooded eye technique.
Okay, good. I think my face is good for draw on.
Yeah. So the hooded eye technique is,
no.
if you have your eye closed, there's like
there's like a slight
slump, but once you open your eyes, it like becomes regular.
Joins up like a sort of flip, like a flip book, like a book that has a pop out thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think the reason is because it never really appealed to me. And I think it's the same reason it doesn't really appeal to, and not because it's not an important issue, because like they're like, well, why when I'm being like when I'm facing violence from the police, facing violence in the community as a result of like poverty, a lot of people are like, why should I care about this when you're talking about like recycling and polar bears? Yeah, so like a lot of people of colour, like let's say the UK, are not really like being shown any reason why they should give a fuck about this. Like actually there's so many activists, so many writers and people with knowledge who are from frontline communities who have way more important like things to say and are way more aware of these things. Like a lot of indigenous communities in like North and South America just have a completely different awareness of like what's going on, a real awareness, because there is like a communal, there is like a connection to like sense and the land, and especially as communities who've experienced trauma through like genocide and the theft of land and watching what's being done to the planet is like.
Look straight ahead.
Yeah.
Your lashes are so long.
They are naturally.
Literally.
Very long.
Killer lashes.
It's so funny. Like it's I side like that, but it's actually extremely like nourishing and very important to extremely like nourishing and like important to like talk about these things. I'd much rather be talking about it than not, because it's actually way more. I've noticed that in the world it's really confusing. The world is very confusing to a lot of people because they don't really know what's going on. And I remember somebody even talking about like they just know we're all dying. But like, I'm really fun at parties. Sometimes it doesn't help. Like there's a time when you can be like, I don't want to read the news, and that's fine. But like, there's also something really like grounding about knowing like where you've come from and where you're going. Because if you don't talk about it, then you're reinforcing the whitewashing and you put a word in front of washing of different things, like many different kinds of washing. Like you're reinforcing the whitewashing of history and the whitewashing of right now. And that's one of the problems with like with like environmental like activism. That doesn't mean that people who are part of those movements are evil. It's like, why should I shouldn't have to say that because it's obvious, but that doesn't mean that people who are part of those movements haven't done really good things. If anything, one of the problems that a lot of people have had with like Extinction Rebellion, who at least have like brought a lot of stuff to the forefront in terms of talking about things, is that there's not, as far as a lot of people are concerned, there hasn't been a lot of talk about people that came before them.
In what ways is the mainstream environmentalist movement not taking into consideration anti-colonialism?
By not talking about it, by not centering or even really particularly talking about the narratives of frontline community, the like voices and the experiences of frontline communities. There are some things, because I noticed that like the pink boat that was in the middle of Oxford Circus and then moved for a bit, the Extinction Rebellion was doing, that was like named the Berta Cáceres. Like that is important that they've you know, they've like honoured her name, but by naming that boat after her, but it feels a little bit like it's kind of like
tick boxing.
Yeah, I was gonna say tick boxing. It's good that it's there, but it's like, well, but that's only written down. But what is that like? What practices are involved in the thing in the organisation itself? And also, it's not accessible to. I mean, I feel like this goes beyond like anti-colonial or decolonial, but like, it's not accessible to like people of colour really through the narratives, but also when something's really white, it's very difficult to like engage with it. So many communities here that can be that are actually dealing with like what people like with like pollution in a way disproportionate way. So like if you live near an airport, same in the States as well, like because I know that like somewhere like Flint, Michigan is a really good example of what people call environmental racism, which is when communities like of colour, like often black communities in the States and indigenous communities are like disproportionately affected by pollution. I think it's important to note that when me or other black people go to a demo and or a protest, and we're treated very differently by them. police. If black people are in groups, we're treated very differently. And it's just crazy to think about. The idea of like, let's all go to a demo and get arrested is like dangerous and inaccessible, irresponsible for a lot of younger people. And it's just like, that could be a death sentence for a person of colour, for anyone. But
especially,
yeah, I don't think people quite realise. Our communities have been on fire for a long time, and these flames are fanned by our exclusion and silencing. Like, yeah, I think it's funny because like our house is on fire, and like now those flames are like licking at the feet of like people who are creating the fire, but also people who have more privilege and things like that, and they're like, oh, ow, ow. But we've just been stood on fire for like so long.
So to kind of finish off, I know that the conversation is much longer than this, but we do have a limited time. What would the solution to this be, or what would like the climate justice movement ideally look like for things to, you know, actually change on a structural level?
It would look more like what Wretched the Earth are trying to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it would look like environmental movements led by and that center the voices and the people from frontline communities. That doesn't mean that like very privileged white people can't do loads of things. But it'd be weird if people didn't, because we all need to work together to dismantle the system that's currently killing us. The main thing to do is to work out what you have to do. That's the work you have to like. If you're a white person, you're like, oh, but how do I, you know, sort of help? And I feel like I can't help because I feel like I'm like helpless to sort of change things when I know that it's important that like people of colour are centred in movements, things like that, whatever it is. And it's kind of like, well, you have to sit down and think about what you can do rather than asking people all the time. Ask people as well, but like you sit down and you think and you listen and like read as opposed to write and like speak.
Thank you so much for coming here and doing this interview with me. It was really, really lovely to have you.
It was really good. It was really good. I hope I am fleeky, right? On fleek.
On fleek. This was Kieran from Wretched of the Earth. And yeah, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe to Kieran's channel when
it doesn't exist yet.
When it comes out at some point. And I will see you next time, Convibes. Bye bye.